Destruction Derby, one of the earliest and most popular racing games that would have originally saw life on the PlayStation during the early months of the console's release, would get a port to the Sega Saturn in early 1996, playing very similar to that of its competing console. Now there are some slight differences. The PlayStation version was a lot smoother in terms of its overall gameplay, visuals and design, although there was some elements in the frame rate drops that would slow down on the PlayStation version, but the same elements do happen on the Saturn. But there are some definite notable visual differences when you compare the two, as yes, the Saturn visuals aren't as refined and the textures on screen look a lot more limited or scaled down compared to the PlayStation. Even the gameplay itself seems and feels a little bit slower as well. Now, not to say that the original game was a fast game by any means. When you look at it compared to other games that were appearing at the time on all of these consoles, no, it wouldn't have been the quickest racer at all. But the PlayStation, when it did get going, yeah, there was some noticeable differences. But I found from playing the Sega Saturn version, it just felt sluggish and even more laggy at times. While it's not considered as the best port, it's solid enough for what it tries to do. But that doesn't take away from the whole gameplay dynamic, because for me personally, this is one of my most favourite games that I played, especially in the early years of the 32-bit console generation, especially with me growing up in my teens, because I had a PlayStation. Destruction Derby was one of the first games I ever played on that console. The funny thing is about it is, because I played it and I loved playing it so much, eventually when I did get to own it, I was always really interested in getting to play the other versions that were out there, because there was the port for the Sega Saturn, but there was also a port for the PC. The funny thing is, I got to play the PC version a lot sooner than the Sega Saturn version, obviously through different ways of being able to play games back in the day. Because when I got my first PC when I was in college in 2001, I went down the rabbit hole of trying to find out where I could find and download or even buy old games that I could play on the current system that I had. Some would work, some didn't, and I do remember getting a copy of Destruction Derby, and I did manage to get it to work, and it was good. But I don't know, I just always preferred the PlayStation version. I don't know why, I suppose because it's the first version I ever played. But in saying that, it would take some time for me to get to play the Sega Saturn version, which I only got to play over the last couple of years. I haven't bought a console myself, because the Sega Saturn for me was the one console out of all of the consoles that I've played and owned over the years, and even among myself and my brothers, because we've all owned a variety of different consoles growing up. The Sega Saturn was the one that eluded us for so long, and eventually getting to buy one over say 10 years ago, buying it with a bundle of different games, I finally got a glimpse into playing Destruction Derby 1, because it is one of my most favourite games on the console. I will admit, if I was to compare the two, me personally, I think it's just nostalgic reasons, I would prefer the PlayStation version, but I do like the Sega Saturn version. While there are differences in terms of like the visuals, the frame rates, it does lag, but the PlayStation version does the same. There are some differences in terms of some of the visual effects as well, like with the smoke and some of the other things that happen, because the PlayStation would actually have like visible smoke like particles, which the PlayStation was more capable of being able to utilise 3D effects much better than the Saturn could. The Saturn smoke effects consisted more like, as you can see here on screen, more like 2D kind of like images to give you the illusion of smoke. But again, the console did have its limitations, so the developers had to use some interesting tactics to appeal to those limitations and to make it work, which they did. Like, if you have gripes around those visual elements, I don't think it's a big thing. Yes, it's noticeable, don't get me wrong, but is it a groundbreaking thing, or is it a defining factor that's going to stop you from playing the game? I shouldn't think so. For me, because I love these type of games, and like I said earlier, I always wanted to play the different variants of the game that was available, and now I've managed to do that, and I have no quips or gripes with any of them. Yes, the PlayStation version for me is still my definitive version, now for me personally, but others will differ in their opinions. For many people out there like myself, this version here on the Sega Saturn would have been the first edition of the game that you ever played. It might have been one of the first video games you could ever have played, especially during the 32-bit console generation. But still, whichever version of the game that you play, it's very, very cool. Even the use of the cheats. The first thing I usually always do whenever I go in to play the game is I go in to unlock the Ruined Monastery track, and I use the cheat as you can see here on screen, and it works the same on the Sega Saturn as it does on the PlayStation. It's no different. So I generally like to do that, because I like to just go in and just play a few casual races here or there without actually really diving into the championship. But if you do decide to play in the championship mode, it'd be very like the PlayStation as well, that when you go through the different divisions, some of the track layouts, even though there's essentially 5 tracks in the main campaign and the one unlockable track with the Ruined Monastery, as you scale up the divisions into the highest ones, some of the tracks will have different variations or different layouts. So instead of it being a standard oval track that you'd see in the first section, it will then be in a different format where it could loop around or have like a different like curve or different corners and so forth. So that's That's what made the game interesting, because those tracks were hidden from the main game. You had to actually play through the championship in order to see them or to experience them, which I think was very, very cool. So it added a lot of hidden elements to the experience, and would only be available for those that persisted with it, that really wanted to dive deep into the game. Then you would get to see everything that was available, which I thought was very, very cool.
Second place. Nice move.
Yeah, there are visual differences between all of the console variants, but whichever one was there or you had at your disposal, yeah, it's a good fun game. Whichever's the best one, well, that'll differ on the person themselves. Like I said, my personal favourite is the PlayStation, but everybody else's is different. I don't disagree. I stay neutral in that sense, because they're all decent games, while some are better than others, yes, but it is what it is. You work with what you have. The Sega Saturn did have limitations, like I said, with certain elements of 3D graphics and so forth, but it doesn't say or take away from the fact that there was some solid experiences. And considering this was a port of the PlayStation version, it worked well for what it did. And plus, it gave gamers, very like the Wipeout series and other games that were ported to the PlayStation, it gave Sega Saturn owners a glimpse of some of the many great games that were coming out during that time. Because back then, you were either one side or the other. You either had a PlayStation or you had a Sega Saturn. But for many of us, there was games that were released on both consoles that we eagerly wanted to play, but we couldn't play them unless we owned the console. But we couldn't do that because we didn't have money, or most of us were kids, we wouldn't have had that much money anyway. It's different nowadays because you can buy the consoles that you want. Yes, they are expensive if you're a retro games collector, or you can go the emulation route, and now the sky's the limit. You have choices in abundance now. Sometimes we can have too much choice, but that's a different topic for a whole different video, because you can get overwhelmed very easily, let's just put it that way. But still, I love to go back to play these old games, and I'm even getting to explore a ton more games now on the Sega Saturn that I never got to play, even from having the console here over the years. And there is a lot of really cool games, and I just love even playing the likes of these ports here that were originally on the likes of the PlayStation or the PC. It's just interesting to see the differences between them, and I still think they're just as much fun to play now as ever. Yeah, you have to overcome certain challenges or gripes or whatever, but it is what you make of it at the end of the day. And always remember, this would have been somebody's favourite game ever, and I'm sure it was. While there was future games in the series that could say bettered it in many ways, well, mainly with Destruction Derby 2, that game is just incredible. And while it didn't get a release on the Sega Saturn, which is a pity because I think it would have done well, because it is a very, very cool game. Very underrated game on the PlayStation anyway, even on the PC. But the first two games, that's the funny thing, the first two games were the defining moment in the entire series. They were the best games in the entire series, hands down, because everything that came after, while they were decent experiences, just could not capture that magic that the first two games brought. Very like a lot of games that started off life on the likes of the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. The original games in the series are by far, still to this day, the best ever, and they've never been bettered. So a lot can be said for that. But yeah, I just love Destruction Derby, the first two games anyway, and I still always go back to play Destruction Derby 1. I still love it, still play it, just a lot of fun, and it has great pick up and play appeal if you want to play it in short bursts. That's what I love about it so much. And plus, if you want to relive that nostalgia, this is one of the best games that you can play by far. Yeah, very, very cool indeed. But it will be interesting to hear what you think of the game. Which was your favourite version of it, and was it among some of your favourite racing games on the Sega Saturn? Yeah, very cool indeed. And yes, this is just but one of the many ports that saw a release on the Sega Saturn from other systems that have yet to be explored and discovered, which you can do so here in this next video.